This is the week of essays, and I'm bringing you some of the finest essays ever written. Today I've got a book with me which is called Essays in Love. Not on love, in love. It's a novel but written in a very different format. It's a collection of essays which tells the story of love as the plot unfolds, and it also kind of philosophically analyzes every stage of love. What happens in the beginning, how romantic ideas play out, and eventually, as the complications set in, what happens there, and how the story concludes. So, it's quite an interesting book, and I've got one of the essays, or rather, one of the chapters from the book, which is called Beauty. So, this essay is around the idea of beauty. I'm sure you'll be familiar with this age old question, that is, do you love someone because they are beautiful? Or are they beautiful because you love them? So, I will narrate the essay now. Please remember that the character Chloe that is mentioned in this essay, she is the female protagonist of the story. So here we go. Does beauty give birth to love, or does love give birth to beauty? Did I love Chloe because she was beautiful, or was she beautiful because I loved her? Surrounded by an infinite number of people, we may ask why our desire has chosen to settle on this particular face, this particular mouth or nose or ear, why this curve of the neck or dimple in the cheek has come to answer so precisely to our criteria for perfection. Every one of our lovers offers different solutions to the problem of beauty, and yet succeeds in redefining our notions of attractiveness in a way that is as original and as idiosyncratic as the landscape of their face. If Marsilio Ficino defined love as the desire for beauty, in what ways did Chloe fulfill this desire? To listen to Chloe, in no way whatever. No amount of reassurance could persuade her that she was anything but loathsome. She insisted on finding her nose too small, her mouth too wide, her chin uninteresting, her ears too round, her eyes not green enough, her hair not wavy enough, her breasts too small, her feet too large, her hands too wide, and her wrists too narrow. She would gaze longingly at the faces in the pages of Alain and Vogue and declare that the concept of just God, in the light of her physical appearance, simply an incoherence. Chloe believed that beauty could be measured according to an objective standard, one she had simply failed to reach. Without acknowledging it as such, she was resolutely attached to a Platonic concept of beauty, an aesthetic she shared with the world's fashion magazines and which fueled a daily sense of self-loathing in front of the mirror. According to Plato and the editor of Vogue, there exists such a thing as an ideal form of beauty made up of a balanced relation between parts and which earthly bodies will approximate to a greater or a lesser degree. There is a mathematical basis for beauty, Plato suggested, so that the face on the front cover of a magazine is necessarily rather than coincidentally pleasing. Whatever mathematical errors there were in her face, Chloe found the rest of her body even more unbalanced. Whereas I loved to watch soapy water running over her stomach and legs in the shower, whenever she looked at herself in the mirror, she would invariably declare that something was lopsided, though quite what I never discovered. Leon Alberti might have known better, for he believed that any beautiful body had fixed proportions which he spelt out mathematically after dividing the body of a beautiful Italian girl into 600 units and then working out the distances from section to section. Summing up his results in his book on sculpture, Alberti defined beauty as a harmony of all the parts in whatsoever subject it appears, fitted together with such proportion and connection that nothing could be added, diminished, or altered but for the worse. But according to Chloe, however, almost anything about her body could have been added, diminished, or altered without spoiling anything that nature had not already devastated. Clearly, Plato and Leon Alberti had neglected something in their aesthetic theories, for I found Chloe excessively beautiful. Did I like her green eyes, her dark hair, her full mouth? I hesitate to try and pin down her appeal. Discussions of physical beauty have some of the futility of debates between art historians attempting to justify the relative merits of different artists. But what would all this do to explain why one work of art grips us and another leaves us cold? The language of the eye stubbornly resists translation into the language of words. It was not beauty that I could hope to describe, only my personal response to Chloe's appearance. I could simply point out where my desire had happened to settle, while allowing the possibility that others would locate comparable perfection in quite other beings. In so doing, I was forced to reject the Platonic idea of an objective criterion of beauty, siding instead with Kant's view, as expressed in his critique of judgment, that aesthetic judgments are ones whose determining ground can be none other than subjective. The way I looked at Chloe could have been compared to the famous Mueller-Lyer illusion, where two lines of identical length will appear to be of different sizes according to the nature of the arrows attached at their ends. The loving way that I gazed at Chloe functioned like a pair of outward arrows, which give an ordinary line a semblance of length it might not objectively deserve. A definition of beauty that more accurately summed up my feelings for Chloe was delivered by Stendhal. Beauty is the promise of happiness, he wrote, pointing to the way that Chloe's face alluded to qualities that I identified with a good life. There was humor in her nose, her freckles spoke of innocence, and her teeth suggested a casual, cheeky disregard for convention. I did not see the gap between her two front teeth as an offensive deviation from an ideal arrangement, but as an indicator of psychological virtue. I took pride in finding Chloe more beautiful than a Platonist would have done. The most interesting faces generally oscillate between charm and crookedness. There's a tyranny about perfection, a certain tedium even, something that asserts itself with all the dogmatism of a scientific formula. The more tempting kind of beauty has only a few angles from which it may be seen, and then not in all lights and at all times. It flirts dangerously with ugliness. It takes risks with itself. It does not side comfortably with mathematical rules of proportion. It draws its appeal from precisely those details that also lend themselves to ugliness. As Proust once said, classically, beautiful women should be left to men without imagination. My imagination enjoyed playing in the space between Chloe's teeth. Her beauty was fractured enough that it could support creative rearrangements. In its ambiguity, her face could have been compared to Wittgenstein's duck rabbit, where both a duck and a rabbit seem contained in the same image. Much depends on the attitude of the viewer. If the imagination is looking for a duck, it will find one. If it is looking for a rabbit, it will appear instead. What counts is the predisposition of the viewer. It was, of course, love that was generously predisposing me. The editor of Vogue might have had difficulty including photos of Chloe in an issue, but this was only a confirmation of the uniqueness that I had managed to find in my girlfriend. I had animated her face with her soul. The danger with a kind of beauty that does not look like a Greek statue is that its precariousness places much emphasis on the viewer. Once the imagination decides to remove itself from the gap in the teeth, is it not time for a good orthodontist? Once we locate beauty in the eye of the beholder, what will happen when the beholder looks elsewhere? But perhaps that was all part of Chloe's appeal. A subjective theory of beauty makes the observer wonderfully indispensable.